Hey there, everybody. I guess we'll go ahead and get started right at 10:30. I'm having a hard time streaming into Facebook. I think we've had some updates to the Facebook platform. So we'll go ahead and record this and then drop it in the Facebook group for anybody that likes to go back and watch it. We'll have that available probably later on today. We'll get this video downloaded into the Facebook group. So just do a couple, intros for those of you that haven't been on any of our calls. My name is Tasha Anderson. I'm the founder and CEO of the boutique accounting firm called the Charity CFO. That's all we do. We do accounting services for nonprofits. I also have Tim Hudson here. Tim, if you want to do a brief intro of yourself.
Yeah, my name is Tim Hudson. I am a CPA and partner here at the firm. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer. I've been working alongside Tasha for about 3 years, helping nonprofit organizations across the country streamline their accounting, improve their processes, and clean up their accounting data. So that's sort of my specialty. I like working with systems and doing cleanup projects and help make everyone's life easier, the client's life, my team's life, everybody's life easier in the long run through improved processes.
So I love talking about these sorts of topics, mostly because, for one, we work with so many nonprofits and they come to us with all different challenges, but I can especially relate to the need to systemize and make efficiency for nonprofits, because I used to work for a nonprofit and I had one of those jobs that I was hired because I too am an accountant, as you all might have picked up on. So that's kind of my credentials and my day job, if you will. But when I worked for a nonprofit, I had all other duties as assigned. So I was in charge of HR and IT and facilities. And really what that meant is the job that I was hired because of my skill set, I did in about 15 hours a week out of survival, not trying to brag, it's purely out of survival so that I could make time for all of the other things. So taking that kind of theme and that experience and frankly frustration when I worked for a nonprofit, I actually started this firm about 5.5 years ago with a goal of applying a lot of the things that I've learned, and my obsession, and now our obsession, Tim is equally as obsessed as I am, with finding better, faster, more effective ways of getting the work done. So everything that we do is finding the hybrid of, administratively in-house. When I talk in-house, I don't just mean for us, I mean for our clients, the nonprofits we work with. How does it make it easy for them to get the same, stuff done? It has to be done, but how can we get it done better and faster? And also, how can we have things audit friendly? What do I mean by that? Internal controls, segregation of duties, accuracy. We have our I's dotted, T's crossed with respect to maintaining documentation. In addition to being accountants, Tim and I both come from an audit background. We've both audited companies in the past, and now we are subject to many audits, meaning most of the clients we work with get audited voluntarily or because their funders or donors of some sort require them, or other banks maybe. So everything we do is through that lens, right? How can we get it done quick and effective, and how can we have it audit friendly? So kind of keep that in mind. So one of the major themes that we find, and Tim knows this certainly, I think you would agree, is that some of the kind of the day-to-day tasks, things that have to be done that we could maybe get done a little bit better. And so we just put a couple talking points together. We like the beginning of these calls to be very kind of informational. Let us share a tip, trick, hack, or just kind of news that's going on in the industry and updates, even if it's kind of on a regulatory side, compliance side, whatever. And then we'll open it up to kind of an open Q&A. So you all can ask whatever questions you want, whether it's about the topic or something else. So we just put together more for a visual. Tim, if you want to share your screen, or I can, it doesn't make any difference. But we're going to go over some of our specific tips, tricks, and hacks with respect to paying bills. And Tim works with this platform all the time. Full disclosure, we have no financial partnership formally, although we probably should. They should give us some sort of kickback or something, right? We just like the platform. We always use platforms that are a couple different things. And I apologize if I'm stealing your thunder, Tim, and I'll talk about this. My preference for software, number one, it's not proprietary, which means the Charity CFO, unfortunately, did not invent, we do not own, we do not financially benefit from our clients buying this software, okay? It's not proprietary, meaning we didn't create it, we don't get any kickbacks for it. Number two, It is transferable because it's not proprietary. Whether you choose to work with us or whether you work with one firm or another firm or one accountant, bookkeeper or another, it doesn't matter. No one owns this but our clients. And number three, is it really easy to use, intuitive, and low cost? So I guess that's what I like 3 and 4, right? So this is one of the platforms that we like to use, and just kind of keep that in mind. This is just the best way right now with all of the things that I've already sprinkled into this conversation, why we like using this platform. So what do you think, Tim? Should we just kind of dive in and start talking about how we use this platform for our clients?
Let's do it. Can everyone see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay. Tasha, let me know if it stops working, because sometimes my screen share will go out on me in the middle of a presentation. Okay, so yeah, like Tasha said, the goal of this presentation is not to sell you on Bill.com. We don't make any money from this presentation. We like Bill.com for many of our clients, but there are many of our clients that we sort of dissuade from using Bill.com. We recommend against it because it doesn't make sense in all situations. So we really have just a simple, slide deck here. I want to show you what most industry experts consider to be the best basic workflow of any bill pay process. And then we're going to go through some pros of using Bill.com and how Bill.com can align with this ideal process. And then we'll go through the cons, some of the disadvantages of using the system. And then you can make an assessment for yourself if it might make sense for your organization or not. So as far as the ideal bill process, typically it's 4 basic steps. It's not all that complicated. You want somebody to submit the bills to the accounting team for processing, or to the bookkeeper for processing. That could mean different things in different circumstances, right? You may be getting a bill via email from a contractor. That needs to somehow be sent to the person that will be responsible for processing the bill. You may get a lot of bills in the mail. Someone needs to scan those bills in to a system, or maybe they're not scanned in, maybe they're collected and stacked on somebody's desk to review later. But somebody's got to gather the bills from all the variety of sources, all of the contractors, all of the vendors that the organization works with, gather them together and put them in the hands of the right person for processing. So that's number 1. Number 2 is process. Somebody has to have responsibility. Ideally, it's someone different from the person responsible for gathering the bills, right? Ideally, you want to have separation of responsibilities in each of these 4 steps. But someone needs to come in and take the bills that have been given to them and process them. So what does that mean? They've got to put it into the accounting system. So they've got to track them in the accounting system as a payable. We call that AP, or accounts payable. So that needs to be recorded in QuickBooks or whatever system you're using. B, you need to go in and determine how to record it. In other words, how to code the expense in the accounting system. You need to determine, the amount that needs to be paid. Sometimes that's not always readily understandable from looking at a bill. Believe it or not, you'll have, a previous balance due that might represent, a balance that has already been paid, but the check just hasn't cleared yet. So you've got, money going out and then a bill coming in, they cross streams. So you got to make sure someone's reviewing that to determine the amount that is actually owed, that actually needs to be paid. And then putting that into the system for tracking. Then you've got to have someone come in and approve. That's the 3rd step. And again, that has to be a separate person from the one that did the processing. Somebody has to come in and review the information that the accountant or the bookkeeper has presented. They review how the expense has been coded. They review when the expense was recorded, the date. They review the amount to make sure that it's the correct amount. And then once they agree that we do owe this vendor or this contractor this amount of money, and we agree on the due date and all of that, then that approver can indicate their approval either through an old school sign off. Sometimes, in an old school environment, they're the ones, they just indicate approval by signing the check. So the person processing will prepare the check, and then the person approving will just sign the check, and that's indication that they approve. In a more modern environment, that could be done digitally through the click of a button. They review the bill and they hit approve, and then it goes to the next step. But no matter what, there has to be some sort of approval process so that bills can't just be paid randomly, right? If you have one person recording the bills and paying the bills and approving the bills, that's a lack of segregation of duties, and it opens up the door for potential mismanagement, misappropriation of assets, if nothing else, financial misstatements, right? Somebody screws up and just records something to the wrong place because there's no oversight. So that's important. You got to have some way, shape, or form an approval process, and a process that I should say is demonstrable, or something that you can look up later and see there is evidence that the approval happened. We always say in our line of work, if it's not documented, it's not done. If you can't prove that it was actually approved through a sign off or through, a record on a piece of software that shows that the button was clicked to indicate approval, or the digital sign off, or whatever, there's got to be some way to go back in time and prove that that bill was approved on that date. And the final step, the fourth step, is payment of the bill. And again, ideally, that's a separate person from the person that approved the bills. Once the sign off is complete, once the bill is approved, someone needs to actually do the work of processing that payment, making sure that the check gets physically delivered, mailed to the vendor, or if it's an ACH, the ACH is actually processed, initiated, and goes through. So in a perfect world, you have really 4 separate job duties here that are completed by 4 separate people. Now, in a small nonprofit environment, you may not have 4 people that really have the skill set, or, for them, it would make sense for them to do these 4 separate steps. And that's why we like Bill.com, because it actually kind of facilitates this process in a way that there is some built-in segregation of duties. So if we use Bill.com takes care of step 4. So often in an old school accounting environment, in a smaller organization, the person processing the bills is usually the person paying the bills. So you'll process the bills, you will have a step for approval generally, but then the person that processed the bill has to mail the check and make sure it gets delivered. Theoretically, that does open the door for some, again, misappropriation of assets, potential for fraud, potential for financial misstatements. It's better than nothing. At least you have an approval process. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not ideal. If you use Bill.com takes care of step 4. So it allows the bookkeeper to focus on processing. Bill.com takes care of the payment, and then it facilitates the approval process in between those 2 steps. So let me go into the pros of using Bill.com. And Tasha, please chime in if you want to interrupt me or you have other thoughts to add here. But
yeah, we just go through the list, and then we can give a couple case studies as to some of these specific things. We talk about the pros, but yeah, let's do high level pros for those of you all can kind of see where, this might make sense for my organization, or it may not. So yeah, let's dive into those.
Cool. Okay. So pro number 1 is it saves us a lot of time, especially if you are processing a large number of bills each month. Typically what I'll ask my clients is say, are you writing checks more than like 7 or 8 times a month? Meaning someone has to go in and write the check, sign the check, mail the check, stamp it, all that stuff. If you're doing that more than, 8 to 10 times a month, that's a lot of time. Just the administrative time, buying the envelopes, buying the stamps, addressing the envelopes, whatever. And if you can save a couple hours a month or a couple hours a week, even by switching to an automated digital system like Bill.com, that alone might justify the cost of the software. And we'll talk about the cost of the software in a little bit, but you can save a lot of time just cutting out that work. Now, in this day and age, a lot of smaller organizations will, set up automatic payments through their credit card for certain bills. They may have, bill pay through their bank that's sort of automated. They may not be writing that many checks to begin with. And if that's you may not be ready for Bill.com yet. Now, you may decide you want to make that leap for some of the other advantages, but you may not stand to save all that much time by switching to Bill.com if you're not really writing that many checks already. You may want to wait until the organization grows and it starts to make more sense to justify the cost. But time saving is a huge benefit.
I'll interject time saving, because this is, I think, a very common theme with some of our new clients. Initially, you'll hear the disgruntlement. Oh, it takes me more time. It takes me more time. It's a software and it's a process. So like anything, initially, it's going to be, wait, I need to scan everything. I have to upload it into this portal, and then I need to go and encode things to the portal. How does that take me less time than if I just have the paper invoice here? I just enter it into the system. I spit out a check. I stuff it in an envelope and throw it in the mail. It's one of those things that, I've yet to see a situation where it doesn't actually save time in the long run, because like any process, once you do it more and more frequently, you get the rhythm down. Everybody knows what to do. It does end up saving a lot more time. And we could talk, I think time saving is kind of interwoven through all of these different steps. So I'm going to stop there. But if you all have tried it and you might say, I've done something like this, it takes way more time, it's way more labor intensive. That's kind of a common complaint with anything, right? I just remember my husband would go and get a new TV and he's changing the technology all the time. I'm like, this is harder than what it was before. And then you just get used to it. It's like any new technology, a new phone, a new cell phone. God forbid if you go from an Android to an iPhone, or a PC to a MacBook, it's like the end of the world. So it does save time in the long run. I've yet to see situations where it doesn't really save time, unless Tim, like you were saying, like, you have a handful of checks you cut a month.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't make sense. But even then, there's a couple other reasons why I like it. Even if it doesn't save time, there's a lot of other reasons why.
Yeah, and we'll get into those other reasons. So related to time saving is the fact that it will integrate with your accounting system. So in an old school environment, the person that's processing the bill has to go into the accounting system, record the bill, put the right date, put the right amount, put the right, GL code, and then post it. Then they have to go in and actually prepare the check in a separate system. Sometimes those are integrated, but often they're not. That's sort of a two-step process. In Bill.com, it's a one-step process. You put all of that stuff in, all of that same information into one system, Bill.com, and then Bill.com will sync that information into your accounting system. It works really well with QuickBooks Online, but it will work with all the other modern accounting systems. And then it will also prepare the checks and the payment separately once the approval goes through. So it handles all that on the back end, which makes your life a lot easier. It also guarantees that your accounting system and your bill pay is in sync. So, sometimes this happens where you record a bill for one amount and then you write the check for another amount. And so then it comes time to reconcile your bank and you're mismatched because the systems are separate. In Bill.com, they're the same. And so you don't have that mismatch problem. And that alone can save some time.
And I'll interject too with the integration. And I see some familiar names on the call today, and I've talked to some of you all, and I know your processes so not only the integration of the accounting system, but let's take a step back and talk about the coding of invoices. In a very perfect world, you would have a nonprofit who, those that are incurring expenses, I'm talking about your development director, I'm talking about your program director, I'm talking about maybe your admin assistants, buying supplies, whatever. They are generating expenses on behalf of the organization, right? And hopefully they have some sense on where those expenses are coming out of their individual budget, if you've got that. That's in a very perfect utopia world. And then they would be coding some of their own expenses, whether it's through credit cards or sometimes through vendor payments, right? So if you have a development director and they are hiring entertainment or party rentals or whatever for your gala, you would hope that they have some sense on what their budget is for that event and which line items that might coincide with your accounting budget. So one of the really great things with Bill.com is think about, many of you all I know, you have like some email, print to a PDF, create little red boxes with signatures, or maybe you have a separate template, a separate Word doc, and you populate like a PO, like a purchase order, or some sort of expense approval or coding paper, or maybe it's all in paper, right? They print it. They're like, okay, this goes to the expense and like they've got to handwrite all this stuff down or key it in and print it, attach it to that paper. Then they hand it over to the bookkeeper and the bookkeeper says, okay, now I have this invoice. Let me go and key it into my system. And this vendor wants to be paid through ACH. So now I have to go to my bank, which is a totally separate system, as Tim was alluding to. I have to pay, and then I have to go and post it. So now you've essentially taken one invoice and you've touched it, maybe 3 or more times, right? And they're all out of sync. So you can have data keying errors with, maybe your bookkeeper didn't put the right information that your development director put on the purchase order. So all of this purchase order, that's what I call the paper shuffle. The paper shuffle going back and forth, really it streams all that. And there's one point of data entry. So as somebody submits the invoice, they could actually, depending on how you set up Bill.com, and there's a couple options there, which we won't go into the nuts and bolts. We're not doing a full-on demo here. We're just giving you case studies and examples of how we save money, that we can actually have people input the coding themselves. So as a development director, I'm submitting an invoice, I'm coding it this certain way. And now the bookkeeper is going to say it like, oh, that looks legit. That seems like it jives with the budget. I agree with the account coding. I don't have any issues or questions there. And also if the bookkeeper needs to tag it to any donor restricted funds or, particular funder, or update the particular department or anything to just double check the coding that your initial expense, initiator created. And like Tim said, all of those things are integrated within your accounting system. So there's one point of data entry rather than multiple points. And I distinctly remember that being a huge source of frustration for me when I was a CFO of a nonprofit, because I would have 10 different people submitting purchase orders 10 different ways. Nobody ever did it totally correctly. And it's like, why are we even doing this at all? No one's actually doing it because I'm ultimately just changing everything anyhow, which isn't the best practice, but that's a good integration. So any of you all that are doing the paper shuffle, or you're doing some weird hybrid email, all of a sudden now you have 50 emails extra per week because you're trying to get vendor invoices approved, this will completely eliminate all of that noise in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of related to this, Tasha talks about the paper shuffle. The third point here that we consider to be a huge pro is it's really conducive to a virtual environment. And the fourth point is it eliminates the need for paper. All this is related, right? When COVID hit everybody back in March of last year, two of the biggest areas probably in the entire nonprofit industry that was really caused problems in switching to a virtual environment was depositing checks and paying bills. And of course, we're just focusing on paying bills here. But if your bill pay system is sort of what Tasha described earlier, as far as receiving a paper copy, filling out a PO, shuffling papers from someone's desk to another desk to another desk, you can't do that in a virtual environment. If everybody has to go home tomorrow and work virtually for the next 6 months, you can't just pick up that process and move it to a virtual environment. It doesn't work like that. Bill.com is 100% conducive to a virtual environment. Everything is in digital format. Bills that are received digitally can be configured to automatically forward straight to Bill.com, meaning if you have contractors or vendors that send you an email bill, you can set up the system for Bill.com to collect all of those bills automatically, and then it's in a queue for your bookkeeper or your office manager to review and process each week or twice a week or whenever they decide to do that. If you get any bills in paper form in the mail, those need to be scanned in and uploaded directly to Bill.com. Now, these days, almost every type of vendor, every type of bill that you might receive, you can receive it electronically. Even your water bill and your utilities, usually by default, those come via the mail, but you can configure those to come digitally and funnel straight into Bill.com. Obviously, if you're dealing with paper checks and bills and POs and all that stuff, you can't just pick that up and convert that to a virtual environment at the drop of a hat. You very much can with Bill.com. And I will say, not to speak for our clients, but from the feedback we've received from our clients, they had a lot easier time transitioning to a virtual environment. At least those of them that had already set up Bill.com, that we've already set these processes up, they were in much better shape going into this pandemic than many other nonprofits were, this time last year. So that's a huge point, I think, of a pro from Bill.com that's becoming more relevant or has become more relevant in the past year. I'll skip. Go ahead.
Too, as it relates to virtual, sometimes we think about our staff, but many of you all have second signature requirements on thresholds over a certain dollar amount. And I don't know about you all, but I remember, anything over $2,500 had to be signed by the board treasurer. And naturally, you have a board treasurer that may travel a lot for their job, or they have a very demanding job anyway. And you, in order to pay a vendor, you have to go hunt down your treasurer, whether that's you drive across town in your car in the middle of a workday or what have you to collect checks, signatures. I've done that multiple times. This isn't just limited to like the CEO and the office manager or department heads. Oftentimes, if there are internal controls, which we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it eliminates the need of tracking down individuals for just normal course of business, whether it's your team members are all virtual. More and more of our clients have no office. Their team is spread out all over the country. So that's pretty normal for us. sometimes we have a board treasurer we have to hunt down, or a board president we have to hunt down. Guess what? They can just log into their computer and review the invoice. Because in this system, it's not just, okay, I'm going to approve you're paying $5,000 to some unknown vendor. You actually get to view and review the invoice. And also, I like to joke with my CEOs, one of the big points of concern for many CEOs, oh, I can't go on vacation on Fridays, or I have to configure my whole week to make sure that I'm present and available to manually sign checks. I can't take vacation on Fridays, or I have to make sure my bookkeeper gets checks cut on Thursdays so I can take off early on Friday. You can review and approve checks to be cut if you're sitting on the beaches of Hawaii, if you feel like it. So that's also another benefit. If you have a rush job on a check, you're not chained to your office. Which, yes, of course, during the pandemic, we saw that absolutely more relevant to every nonprofit, but there's some freedom that comes with this kind of virtual environment as well, that are more practical in nature. And I would expect that nonprofits will continue to have that issue beyond COVID.
Yeah, great point, Tasha. Moving down the line, so employees and contractors can look up payment statuses through this system. So I'm sure everyone has experienced this pain point. You process the bill, you approve the bill, you mail the check, or you submit the ACH. 2 weeks later, the contractor comes back and says, "Where's my money? Did you pay me? What's the status?" And you're like, "I don't know. I know I think I paid it. I think I remember seeing the bill, but that was 2 weeks ago. I've forgotten by this point." If you're a good accountant, you would have tracked, the date that you sent the check in some sort of log so that you can kind of review and see what's going on. But let's be honest. I mean, in most cases, that stuff doesn't get tracked very well. You may know that you can go back and look at your checkbook, obviously, and see when the check was written, but you may not know when it was put in the mail, or even where you mailed it or whatever. I mean, if it's ACH, you're going to have to look up with the bank. It's another system. You've got to go back and figure out, okay, how did I ACH this? Do I have a copy of the confirmation somewhere? Tracking that stuff down every time someone needs a status of their payment is a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Or even, maybe somebody wants a status of a payment and you haven't even seen the bill yet because, the bill got, stuck in the mail on the way to you, or, it got lost in somebody's inbox, or, whatever, it just hasn't made it to your desk yet. That's always a huge point of pain for any bookkeeper, any office manager, any accountant. Bill.com really radically reduces the pain associated with that process. So with Bill.com, everything is managed in a central location. So if you have someone calling you or emailing you and asking for a status of their payment, all you have to do is type in their name, search for the vendor name. You can find it. You can see a history of every payment that you've ever made to that vendor. Bill.com will show you how the payment was made. So Bill.com will process an ACH payment. They'll process a check payment, meaning they will write the check and mail the check on your behalf. They'll pay the vendors however they want to be paid. And you can track it all in one place. You can see, okay, it looks like you were paid via ACH on the 22nd. This is the amount. This is what it will look like in your bank. So you should be able to look it up and see where you were paid and match that to our bill. If they were paid via check, it's even better. You can literally look and see the date that the check was mailed. You can see the date that the check was delivered. So they give you postal service confirmation when the check arrives in the mailbox. And then you can see when the check clears or gets cashed. So you can, and right in Bill.com, you don't have to look in your bank statement to figure out when the check cleared. You can look right in Bill.com and see the check cleared on this date. And so sometimes we'll, respond and say, "You cashed our check. So I don't know why you're confused, but I can see right here the check was cashed." You can send them a confirmation and eliminate all of the hassle of trying to track down that information.
Yeah. So for those of you that have vendors that you find move frequently, I'm looking at you, artists, entertainers. I find I've worked with some arts organizations, and we'll have to make, small payments to them for performances or, exhibits or anything like that. And there's always an issue. Well, we paid the check. Oh, well, I moved, or something. So 3 months ago, well, you never told us that before we issued the check. So, and then of course they're, pretty eager to get their money, or college students or anyone else that you find. If you have a group of vendors that you pay, especially seasonally, it's a big surge, or event-based or something like that. It's really nice to be able to set those up with ACH. I can't tell you how many times I had to do the whole, search for the missing check. And no one knows where it is. We know we sent it out. It didn't clear the bank. We have no idea if it actually reached their destination, and only to find out that's not actually their home. So we have no idea if it's going to get forwarded. So we had to stop the check and then reissue. I really love, really forcing our vendors to essentially, hey, how we pay bills now for our internal control purposes and just overall optimization of our administrative function. We do everything through ACH. So you never have to do the whole, unless you switch bank accounts, it's not out of the wrong cost. Much less frequently nowadays than how frequently people move. So forcing your vendors to sign up through ACH payments eliminates that whole, missing check search journey that you go on every single time. And it is very labor intensive to do that, especially if you have a high volume of those checks with, like I said, those sorts of vendors, the populations that tend to move a lot.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, Tasha, because I talked about how easy it is to look it up, but I didn't really explain. You can give access in Bill.com, varying levels of access to your employees or to your contractors. Your contractors can set up their own profile in Bill.com. Now, all they'll be able to see, they won't be able to see your accounting, but they'll be able to see when the bill is reviewed, when it's approved, and when the payment is sent. So they can get every step of the way. And if you've got a contractor that's constantly bugging you, you can just say, hey, log into Bill.com. You can find out for yourself where your payment is at. Same with employees. If you've got certain employees, or, Tasha referenced, like maybe the development director has lots of bills going out for an upcoming, fundraising event, you can give them access to look up those bills and see the statuses on payment themselves to save you, the bookkeeper or the accountant, the time for having to track that down yourself. And all of this is done securely so that no one has access to do anything they shouldn't do. They only have access to see what they need to see to get the information they need. So that was a great point, Tasha. Limits internal control risks, and this dovetails nicely into this next subject area. Internal controls is sort of the buzzword that we use in our industry, in the accounting industry. And really, it just means good governance policy, good structures, checks and balances, and processes in place to mitigate the risk of fraud, misappropriation of assets, theft, basically, or financial misstatements. Those are the kinds of things that, as accountants, we're constantly worried about. We don't want any opportunity for those sorts of issues to arise. And so we build processes and procedures and safeguards to prohibit that from happening, at least as much as we can. You can't ever fully safeguard against any sort of fraud or theft or whatever, but you can make it really, really difficult to successfully pull something like that off. And the best way to do that, going backwards one slide, is to follow this 4-step process where there are 4 separate roles responsible for submitting the bills, processing the bills, approving, and then paying. And you can do that, again, through Bill.com very easily. And I should also mention, I'll go right into the next point. It's a very audit-friendly process. We work with audit firms across the country. I don't know, probably something like 60% of our clients get audited every year. Tasha and I are both former auditors. We understand the audit process very well. And everybody we work with, as far as auditors or board members or anybody in a position of governance or whatever, is thrilled with the Bill.com system. It's always better than, whatever in-house system you're going to come up with as a small nonprofit, just because it's almost impossible to have a really solid internal control process with separate duties when you're a small nonprofit. If you've got a team of 100 employees and you've got an accounting team of 7 or 8, sure, you can build in those safeguards in an old school method pretty reliably because you've got enough people that can kind of segregate roles. Certainly most of the people on this call are not in that position. If you're a smaller nonprofit, you need to leverage software like Bill.com to really implement the solid internal controls that we're talking about. And the nice thing with Bill.com is it documents every step of the process. You can always go back in time and see a record of when the approval was made, when the payment was made, who approved, who paid, who processed. You can see all of that information so that the auditors can get solid evidence that the process was followed correctly. So again, like I said earlier, having the process is one thing that's important, but it's only half the battle. You've got to make sure that the process is configured in such a way that it is documented every step of the way, so that when you got an auditor coming in. And it may be a financial statement auditor, it may be a government auditor, right? Maybe some sort of desk audit, or, God forbid, an IRS audit, something like that, that they're knocking on your door and they want proof that you followed a prescribed process. If you've got, paper shuffling processes and you've got to find or track down a copy of a signature on a bill approval from 2 years ago, that's a nightmare. Even if it still exists, it may not even exist anymore. It may have been shredded or thrown away at some point. With Bill.com, all of that data is preserved and very easy to look up and very easy to prove.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we all know the routine. When the auditors come in, let's make sure we signed all the invoices. Let's double check everything before we hand it over. And the reality is sometimes life happens and we're in a situation where somebody is out of the office. I can't sign the actual invoice, just pay the bill online. I'll try to do it when I get back, and then you forget about it. And then when the auditor comes in, they're like, well, we looked at 50 invoices and 2 of them didn't make your signature. And you have the argument as the CEO or, the person in charge. Well, I reviewed the bank statements. I, signed the bank statements, or even I signed the check. I just failed to sign the actual invoice. We see this happen all the time. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why we started implementing this for our clients, because it's a foolproof way to never have to worry, because we really can't pay bills. If you set the rules up, like you were saying, Tim, we can't pay anything without the appropriate signatures. Now, what's also great about that is you have flexibility for where you can do that. So worst case scenario, if you have to log into your phone or on your computer, you can certainly do that from any place where you are. So that's all the pros, right?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the cons. There are probably more than this, but these are some of the ones that we came up with as sort of the most common ones, common reasons why you may want to defer implementation of some sort of system like this, or it may not make sense for you to implement Bill.com. Number one is it's very costly. Like I said, it can save you a lot of time. It has a lot of advantages, but if you are a small nonprofit that already has a decent, streamlined, efficient process for paying most of your bills, it probably doesn't make sense for you. A lot of nonprofits that don't even have physical space, right? Like maybe they're renting space from like a co-working space and they don't have like utility bills, or they're, all working in a virtual environment. Those sorts of nonprofits generally don't benefit from Bill.com because they just don't get that many bills. Or, like I said, organizations that are, fairly modernized and a lot of their bills are recurring bills that are automatically paid or paid via ACH through the bank anyway. It just may not justify the cost, because we're talking about a base price of $50 a month. Now, I didn't have this on here, but they do add, I believe, $10 per user. Yeah. So if you've got multiple accounting teams, if you've got, multiple department heads that need to approve bills, whatever that might look like, that's additional costs. It's $2.18 per check. So anytime you pay a check, it's $2.18, and it's 50 cents per ACH. So the costs add up quite a bit in practice. Organizations that use Bill.com, I don't know, for 20 something bills a month, that's going to generally cost somewhere between $80 and $100 a month, just in practice. Organizations that are processing more, I have some clients that pay $300 to $500 a month for Bill.com. If they're working with a lot of different contractors, if they're, some organizations will pay their mini grants out of a system like Bill.com, that can get very costly. Now, ironically, the more expensive it is, the more it's probably worth your while, because if you are making 100 check payments a month, you really need a system like Bill.com to keep everything straight. Otherwise, we're talking about a disaster. I mean, that's a full-time job just to keep up with bills if you're doing this manually. So ironically, if you're kind of on the high end of what you would pay, it's probably worth it. But if you're on the low end, if you're only going to be, cutting, 5 to 6 checks a month, and you're talking about spending, $60, $75 a month for that, it may not be worth it for you right away. Other things, and Tasha alluded to this, it is very difficult to set up. This is a complicated software system. I will say it's reasonably intuitive, reasonably user-friendly, but it's not the kind of thing that a novice can just pick up and learn in 30 minutes. It takes time to really get comfortable with the system, to really learn it. to really get good at it. And just like Tasha said, like any system, in the short term, it will take more time. We bring on clients all the time, and I always warn them, it's sort of like ripping the Band-Aid off. You've got to give it 1 to 2 months. Be patient with yourself, be patient with your team, be patient with us. It's going to be painful. But once we get past that 1 to 2 months where everybody really learns the system, gets comfortable with the flow of the process, it will save time in the long run. I guarantee it. But it's a little bit of a transition period. If you're at a place where you don't have the time to dedicate to some sort of implementation, it's probably not the time to implement Bill.com, because you really need to have some time, some bandwidth across your organization to get comfortable with a system like this. I think in many cases, it's well worth it in the long run, but in the short term, be mindful of that. The setup can be difficult. And I'll also say, if you don't have someone that's pretty good with software and accounting software in particular on your team, you may want to consider, contracting that out, at least for implementation. Certainly with our clients, they're in great hands because we follow that entire setup. We handle the setup, we handle the training and the troubleshooting for them. So it makes it a lot easier. But if you're doing it on your own and you have limited experience with this kind of thing, you may want to consider bringing a professional into your corner to help you out. Difficult to troubleshoot. So again, it's a complex piece of software. There's a lot of weird things you've got to understand, especially the integration between Bill.com and QuickBooks or your accounting system. Sometimes that integration will get out of sync, and troubleshooting those sync errors can be confusing, but you've got to make sure those systems are in sync. Otherwise, your accounting is going to be inaccurate. So there are some things that can be difficult to troubleshoot. I'll say that the support team for Bill.com is relatively good. Sometimes not as good as I would like, but generally speaking, they do a decent job. They can be slow to respond, but they'll get you the answer that you need. But it takes some patience. Again, especially as you learn the system, it takes some patience to troubleshoot and to figure it out. Again, our clients are in good hands because we really do that process for them. They never even have to find out about the sync errors because we troubleshoot that for them. We have actually had clients that have moved on from working with us for one reason or another, and found that Bill.com was just unworkable because they weren't really comfortable with the troubleshooting and the back end and the stuff that they never had to deal with before. But anyway, that can be a little bit of a pain. And then the final con, which I'd put an asterisk next to this one because it's sort of a con, but it's sort of the way it should be. You do lose some flexibility. So if you're an organization that doesn't really have a solid bill pay process in place, we pay the bills when we're ready to pay the bills. A contractor comes to our door and, needs us to, write them a check for mowing the lawn or whatever. We just write the check right there and whoever's available signs the check. That's not a very good process. That opens yourself up for a lot of risks when things don't follow the standard flow. But a lot of organizations, good, bad, or otherwise, are in that situation. And if you're transitioning from that sort of situation where, it's the Wild West and everybody does what they want to do and we pay the bills when we need to pay the bills. If you're transitioning from that unstructured situation to Bill.com, which is very structured and has all these enforcement policies to ensure that nothing gets paid until it's approved, nothing gets approved until it's been processed, transitioning to that structured system can be a little frustrating. You lose the flexibility, right? Your contractors have to get used to the fact that, hey, if you want to get paid, you have to send the bill to this place. We're going to have to process the bill in a certain way. We're going to have to approve it, and then you'll get your payment. Getting everybody on board with that can be a little time consuming, can be a little frustrating at times. You do lose some flexibility, but I contend a solidly designed bill pay process should not be very flexible. If you really want to combat, the risk of fraud or financial misstatement or whatever, you need to have a relatively rigid, structured system, and Bill.com will allow you to do that. So as an organization grows, especially, your ability to be flexible in these processes sort of goes down. You're going to have more scrutiny. You're going to be subject to more scrutiny in your audit. You may have to get different types of audits depending on your size. Your board is generally going to be looking over your shoulder a little more to make sure that processes are being followed correctly. And, all of that really equates to, you've got to have your stuff together if you are a growing nonprofit that wants to be sustainable long term, and Bill.com will help you sort of facilitate that. Anything else, Tasha, that you want to add?
I don't think so. You gave me a new idea for a webinar as you were talking about troubleshooting software, and it's so fascinating to me. I've been in the business long enough to remember auditing organizations that still did their accounting on green column paper, believe it or not, and just in basic Excel, and how much the world of accounting has really morphed, like many other areas of business, into a very tech-driven space. And, I think we could do a whole conversation on ways that we have always defined, and we joke about this, and we've probably said it 100 times on these calls, where sometimes I feel like we run an IT company because everything is just so tech driven, and we're so obsessed with figuring out ways to make things better, faster, smarter, and not just in a way to rush through the work, but oftentimes it lends itself to more accuracy. And the more that we can take off of the existing nonprofit team, right? So the staff, right? All those administrative processes, because we're usually the ones kind of creating more work for them. How can we make it done better? And it's just really important I'm sure with every element of the nonprofit business, to be evaluating the systems and processes, but it really just kind of speaks to the need for tech savvy individuals, because systems are great until they stop working. There's little glitches. And then generally, I mean, the tech, we train all of our staff on how to troubleshoot it. So it's certainly not impossible rather, but it's just really important for, your accountant or bookkeeper, whoever you're working with, to be able to kind of troubleshoot and kind of look at a higher level view on how do all these components work together, and is there a way to make things better and smarter, not necessarily harder, right? So I would say in the grand scheme of things, this would be a struggle or difficult for people that are used to using QuickBooks Desktop, and they like their checks and they like to print their checks, and they like to file them in a paper system, and they like to mail, they like to feel it, they like to touch it while they sign it. I actually had one person that wanted us to do their checks and decided to not move forward with working with us because she just liked to touch the check stock and sign the paper checks. And I said, well, there's a place for everyone, that we're probably not the right solution for you, because it just creates a lot of challenges, as we kind of morph into this more modern world, I guess. But yeah, so if you all are wanting any questions or have any questions, feel free. I'll drop the link here. Shameless plug for our Facebook group. We monitor that, and I personally respond to the questions. So if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, or want to just, throw any other software by us, it's likely, we're not experts on all software. We certainly come across it through the course of our work, but I'll drop the Facebook group there if you have any questions about Bill.com, the functionality, or if there's another area of your business that has seemed to be a source of frustration, that there has to be an easier way to get this thing done. Go ahead and go over to the Facebook group, drop that in. I do know we have a few minutes left on this call. We can also open it up to just general questions. If anything has come up, I know that there's a lot of things going on right now in the world of nonprofit. We're happy to do our best to answer questions, or at least, kind of point you into the right direction. So let's just go ahead and open it up to kind of general Q&A, whether it's about accounting or nonprofit management, software, processes, audits, internal controls. We're kind of spending a lot of time doing that right now. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. We'll stick around for another 10 minutes or so. We are doing these every other week now, so just keeping a lookout. If you're not getting the emails, which probably most of you are, that's why you're on. We will send newsletters out through your email and just remind you of whatever the topic is. I think, shameless plug, I have it down for that as well. Let me tell you what I had planned on talking about in 2 weeks. Ken doesn't even know, so he's like, great, what a surprise for me. We were going to actually, I want to talk about, we've done so many PPP applications, Tim. I want to talk about some foolproof ways that we've been able to get the PPP forgiven. If you all have not already gotten your PPP round 1 forgiven, if it was a nightmare for you, or if you didn't get round 1 and you submitted funding for round 2, now the PPP program has closed again. I have no sense, Tim, maybe you're paying more attention to it than I was. I think it's been closed for 3 days now or something like that. I don't know if it's going to reopen. I don't know if that program is going to get extended. I do believe they ran out of money, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see what the Biden administration pushes through for that. There are other sources of funding that have become available. So maybe consider some of those, do some research, but we were going to go over how we have been successful in getting our PPP applications for our clients gone through very, very seamlessly with very little headaches. And we could talk a little bit about that if you all have struggled with that, or if you're anxious about that, we can talk about it. So that's what we're going to talk about next time. So not next week, but the following week.
Yep.
Oh, Dave has a good question here. He says our audit has taken abnormally long this year, 4 months and counting. Our firm is referencing COVID as the reason. Are others experience the same thing, or should I be looking for a new firm? You're putting me on the spot, Dave. Is that common this year? Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, Dave has an August or September year end. So if you were talking about December 20, what year would we be in? 2019, we saw a lot of firms really struggling, scrambling, right, Tim, last spring, figuring out how we're going to get these audits done. They've never done virtual audits. They're used to going on site. The nonprofits weren't used to, didn't have their stuff digitized. People weren't going in the office. It was a little bit of a disaster. To be honest with you, I will say, and Tim, correct me if you think I'm wrong, most firms really were able to get some good processes in place and re-strategize by summer. So it's a little surprising to me that it's taken much longer than you're used to experiencing. I think likely what in my experience, and I don't want to speak for all firms, here's what I've noticed happened, and Tim, I think you would agree with this, that all of the audits that were slated for March, April, so all the December year ends last year, March, April, May, they were on hold. People wouldn't let their auditors into their office. Their auditors didn't have a system to do it virtually. Maybe the client didn't have the means to digitize everything that the auditors wanted. It was just an disorganized mess, frankly. So all of those audits, we know, because we were going through it, got punted into like June, July, August. So Dave, when your audit was normally scheduled to work, you also got booted as well. So even though you think, well, I mean, my audit didn't happen till the fall, why is that still lingering? We saw our audit season normally is very heavy this time of year. And usually by, when do you think, Tim? Because you manage more of these than I do. Usually by late summer, it's all wrapped up. Then we get a nice kind of a little break. And then the June year ends, or August year ends start hitting us by, fall. So we do get a little bit of a break. Last year, though, we were still wrapping up December year ends in October, November. And that is not common. And, I hate to, brag, but I don't think it's really our fault at all, because all of our systems are audit friendly virtually all the time. I mean, they have been for years. Well, I just like to think we were, we're just ahead of the curve. We're starting a trend, but a lot of the firms that are used to coming on site struggled. I think a lot of those audits still lingered into the fall. Would you agree with that, Tim?
Yeah, for sure. It's been a disaster for the entire industry, frankly, and I won't throw the audit firms under the bus completely. I do think many clients, not our clients, but many other nonprofit organizations were not prepared for a virtual audit. Yeah. And it did make the lives of these auditors much more difficult. It slowed things down quite a bit. The way audit firms work, it's a very high volume, low margin business. And, everybody's scheduled out with very little flexibility for the entire year, especially audit firms that specialize in these smaller nonprofit audits. Every single, week of the year for every single person on payroll is accounted for, meaning, an audit firm that has a team of 30 accounting associates, they're all booked up. And as soon as something starts to slip, it has this cascading impact on everybody across the organization. And it can really slow things down. But I got to be honest, I was very frustrated with some of these audit firms we've worked with over the past year, because it just didn't seem like they were prepared. they fell way behind schedule. I had a few that didn't even meet the November 15th deadline, which is sort of the deadline for us to get the tax return out after we file an extension, if you're assuming you're a December year end, which Dave, I know you're not, but most are. Anyway, so it caused a lot of issues. I will say I'm not seeing nearly as much of that this year. It seems like it's recovered quite a bit. If you're still experiencing issues, even in 2021, you may want to consider going out for bid. Consider a different audit firm. We have a lot of great companies that we work with, that we refer business to, that we find, generally speaking, do quality work, and they do it efficiently. So there's just like any service, there are good ones and bad ones out there. Without knowing the specifics of the situation, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but yeah, it's been a crazy year for audits, that's for sure.
And here's the good news in that, I think, because we've set this whole virtual, why do you need to come out on site and disrupt our team for 2 weeks? And when I mean our team, I mean our client's team, really, because they want to go on the client side, even though all the documents are housed in the cloud. Why do you need to go on site? And I don't mean that to say like, oh, I got some things to fight over here, but it's very disruptive. And oftentimes many of our clients have like one conference room. I know I used to be an auditor for 7 years. Tim used to be an auditor. So they're very disruptive, and they take up very valuable real estate, right? If you have one conference room and the audit firm is sitting there for 2 weeks. What I'm very excited about is so many of these audit firms have seen the light that, hey, they have to get better about being able to do audits, maybe virtually, because so much of the work is done virtually. I can't tell you how many, not really financial statement auditors, but federal audits, city grants, funders, they want you to take whatever you have digital, print it, right, in paper, and have it sit on a table, state auditors too. And it's just like, this is crazy. There has to be a better way to do it. So what I'm really excited about is that audit firms have been pushed pretty aggressively to become much more modern so that they could do things maybe a little bit more remote, which I think is going to be really great for many of our clients that, frankly, it's pretty disruptive to have an audit team on site. And I will say, a little controversial, sometimes those audit teams don't always have to be out there that long, because I will have clients say, why do they have to be out there that long? And I say, because they charge you a lot of money to do that work. And they want you to know that they're there doing the work, even if they don't actually have to be on site. So that's a little industry secret sometimes, that, they do come on site for FaceTime and to spend time. Now, many of us feel like, you're lovely, we love you, that's great, but, can you get out of my office? So I've got work to do, and it doesn't include auditing full time. So yeah, that's not uncommon. We've seen things a lot better this year. I like to think too, we tend to partner with really great audit firms that also kind of embrace this virtual world and work with those systems that we work with. So any other questions? I know we just got like 2 more minutes. So if there's any other questions, go ahead and drop those here in the chat and we can get to those. Otherwise, we'll just wrap this call up. We'll see you all in the Facebook group. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk more about PPP forgiveness and maybe some other news and updates that we might have on some additional funding or expansion of that program if we get any news on that. We'll see. I haven't heard anything. No other questions? So we'll go ahead and end this call. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you found it valuable. If there's any other topics that you all would love to hear more about, any other frustrations or issues you've had, feel free to drop them in the Facebook group, send us a message, and we will put that in our queue to talk about. Everybody enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.